Soldiers, family, civilians, and everyone who's part of the Fort Riley family. My name is Kristen Joplin, and I am a Big Red 1 spouse. My husband is Chief of Operation Victory Wellness, and we are excited to introduce to you Chad Robichaux tonight. He is a former Force Recon Marine and DoD contractor with 8 deployments to Afghanistan as part of a Joint Special Operations Command task force. Chad is also a 3rd-degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and is a former professional mixed martial arts champion, having competed at the highest levels of the sport. I practiced that. Chad is also a best-selling author and has written 6 books related to veteran care, donating over 100,000 copies to the troops during his resiliency speaking tours, which will be available today. He has become a go-to resource and is considered a subject matter expert on faith-based solutions to PTSD, having advised the former presidential administration, Congress, the VA, the DoD, and was appointed to serve as the chairman of a White House Veterans Coalition. He is also the president and founder of Save Our Allies, whose mission is focused on the evacuation and recovery of Americans and our allies trapped in Afghanistan and currently Ukraine. And in closing, Chad founded the Mighty Oaks Foundation, a leading nonprofit serving the active duty and military veteran communities and highly successful faith-based combat trauma and resiliency programs. The Mighty Oaks Foundation is especially dear to my personal family. My husband and I had an opportunity to both attend the legacy programs last year. When our family was hurting and ready to give up, we asked for help from Mighty Oaks, and they said, hang on just a little bit longer. We're coming to get you. And they did. They taught us faith-based tools for effective communication and how to love one another as a godly husband and godly wife. And he helped us reconcile our family. So thank you, Chad, and your foundation for never giving up on our military families. And without further ado, I give you Chad Robichaux.
Thank you. Thank you for taking this. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate everyone that made it here tonight, and those watching online. I know there's some of you watching online, and oh, I thought he was talking to me. No? Okay. With what she said about Mighty Oaks, we do several things. The legacy program that she was talking about is our recovery program for those who are struggling. I'll talk more about it at the end if anybody wants information on it, but it's for those who come to our program that are struggling with different things through military service. And then our resiliency program. Today, we were at the base theater, and we had 2 groups come in, and the base theater was full, and we talked about resiliency and the pillars of resiliency, being mentally, physically, spiritually, and socially prepared to do the work that we have to do as military service members, and then being able to recover from the hard things that we're going to do and see in our military service. And so resiliency is one of my favorite topics to talk about because I believe in preventing the problem instead of just always working on fixing it. And that's something we learned from the military, but we certainly could use those lessons in our personal lives. I want to share a story that to start off with that I shared with the warriors today. It's one of my favorite stories from my time in Afghanistan. I was a Force Recon Marine, and I was assigned to a JSOC task force, which a Joint Special Operations Command task force, for those who don't know. And I served in one of the premier special operations units for 8 deployments in Afghanistan. My job in that capacity was to be an AFO, Advanced Force Operator, essentially going out ahead of my unit to do all the clandestine infrastructure to put our assaulters on target to capture or kill bad guys. And in that job, you typically work with 1 or 2 other people. You wear plain clothes, civilian clothes. You get to grow your beard nice and big, and you work with a lot of local nationals. And the person I worked with most was my interpreter, Aziz. He went from my interpreter to become my teammate. The 2 of us worked together, and he ultimately became my friend. And over all 8 of those deployments, this particular day it was myself and Aziz, and one other teammate. He was a Navy SEAL, and the three of us were in a Toyota Prado, which is like a Toyota 4Runner, and we were driving into the eastern side of the capital city of Kabul on a road called Jalalabad Road, which some of you may know. As we're driving on Jalalabad Road, I looked in my rearview mirror, and I saw a truck full of guys that looked like they were the Taliban. Very stereotypical tribal clothing on, big beards. They were dusty, dirty. They all had AK-47 assault rifles, and even seen one RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. So these guys were definitely up to no good. We were not in a position to get in a fight. We maybe had pistols stuck in our waistbands, but that was the extent of it. And so looking at like how many guys were in this truck, and there was a lot of them, and for those that hadn't been to Afghanistan, we have a joke. How many Taliban can you fit in the pickup truck? So the answer is one more, right? They pile in this truck, and they're usually like one like sitting on the roof. And I was making sure these guys weren't following us. So I did a technique I learned in training called deviating your route. So I'm on Jalalabad Road, and I kind of make the block, and as I'm making the block, they continue to follow us. When I get back to my original route and turn right on Jalalabad Road, and they turned and followed me, that it let me know, in fact, they were actually following us. It also let them know that I knew they were following us. So it started a pretty aggressive pursuit, and I made a decision to go into the city of Kabul to try to lose them. And I don't know where everyone's from here. I don't imagine as much traffic here, but wherever cities you're from, if you think there's bad traffic, it's nothing on third world traffic. Like Kabul has no stoplights, no stop signs. Everyone's kind of fighting for themselves. So it's kind of craziness, and I figured I could lose them in that busyness. I was making my way through that busy traffic and made it to a major intersection called Masood Circle, and all of a sudden the traffic began to congest and stop. And somehow that truck full of Taliban guys got around us about 20 yards and made a roadblock and blocked us in. And it was a pretty bad situation. I remember a few guys jumped out the back with their rifles, and probably the most vivid memory as the passenger stepped out, you could immediately tell who was in charge. He took his time to close the door behind him, and he turned and looked at me and gave me a hand signal to stop my vehicle. Again, a very bad situation. In my training experience, it's called being stuck on the X. Right? The X is an ambush site. It's a kill zone. A couple of things you learn in training about the X is really a couple of rules. Rule number one is you have to be able to recognize that you're on the X, right? You got to know your situation. You got to be aware that you're in a bad situation. Rule number two is pretty simple. You have to get off the X, right? You got to move or something bad's going to happen. And I'm so thankful for military training and everything we train for, whatever our jobs are. We train back in peacetime for moments of chaos that we're going to see downrange. We think of every possible scenario that could go wrong and train for it. And again, no matter what your job is, you do it in the military. For me, fortunately, I had trained specifically for this situation. Every year I go to a place called Bill Scott Raceway in West Virginia. We crash cars and do reverse 180s and J-turns and ramming techniques for roadblocks. And so I did exactly what I was trained to do. I hit the guys, I aimed a vehicle towards theirs, and when I smashed in that truck to knock it out of the way, one of my favorite memories of Afghanistan is the little Taliban guys flying out the back. A few of them jumped right before I hit it. The truck spun out of the way, and as it spun out of the way, there was just like this owl in front of me. It was like a perfect pathway with it lighted in to get off that intersection, and I'm headed straight for it, but there was one more obstacle. There was like this 100-year-old policeman with his perfect uniform and his whistle, and he's gonna stop me now. He's blowing his whistle, and he's like, beep, beep. He's putting his hand up. And if you guys ever been overseas at all, you know that traffic cops, and especially in third world countries, their whole life is whatever intersection they have. Like, they're proud of it, they own it. And that was this guy. Like, he was taking control of that intersection. But when he saw I was gonna run him over to get out of there, he jumped on my team, which is how I think Afghans have survived thousands of years of war. They always jump on a winning team for the moment. And he jumped on my team, and he smiled at me and gave me a thumbs up, and he started blowing his whistle and stopping cars and directing traffic, and got us off that intersection, and probably saved our life that day. And I don't know what those bad guys wanted, but I know this: if we would have stopped on Masood Circle that day, if we would have stopped on the X, we would have put up a heck of a fight. But the truth is, we likely would have been killed or taken. And I'm here this week to tell you and all the guys I'm speaking to at the resiliency talks that you don't have to go to Iraq or Afghanistan or any other part of the world to find yourself on the X. Like, from time to time in life, whether in combat or in life, we're gonna find ourselves in a situation where we're stuck on the X, literally and metaphorically. If we choose not to get off that X, we're gonna die. Either literally and metaphorically, we're going to die there. We have to be able to recognize that you're on the X, and you have to be able to make the choice to move forward. And that's really what it comes down to. In my own life and the experience at Mighty Oaks, working with many other veterans, I've really learned it comes down to just that's one simple thing: a choice, or a choice that only us individually can make. Your commander can't make it, your spouse can't make it. It's a choice that only you can make. And I believe God gives you the control over to say, am I going to stay here or am I going to go forward? Now, I believe the best choices are the ones that we make in advance and stick to when times get tough. You know, going back to Masood Circle, I didn't decide in Masood Circle in the moment of that chaos because it was chaotic. I mean, we were banging into cars. We got to that circle, the trucks in front of us, and everything happened so fast. I didn't decide in that moment, okay, I'm going to execute a ramming technique. I just did it because I decided months back at Bill Scott Raceway in training, that's what I'm going to do in this scenario. And I think as military people, we know how to do that really well as professionals. Like we know immediate action drills and contingencies for every possible thing. We have PACE plans like primary, alternate, contingency, emergency, like plans for everything we do professionally, but in our personal lives, we don't do that so well. And that definitely was the case for me. You know, I really had been successful in my life as a professional military person, but in my personal life, I didn't apply those same principles. And just being in kind of full disclosure, and I'll have to go in depth about it, is the decision for me in my personal life not to be prepared for the things that I would face, to not be able to recognize when I was on the X, to not make that choice and decision to move forward, and I found myself on the X in life, literally almost cost me everything. My hardships in my life did not begin in the military. I grew up in a pretty traumatic childhood, a very abusive father who was a Marine in Vietnam. By the way, both my sons are Marines too, so it's kind of like a family tradition. And we all the way back prior to that in the Army for World War II in Korea in our family. So long history of military. My father was, again, very broken, very violent person, a lot of physical abuse in my home. I had a brother who was killed when I was 14 years old. I had a very traumatic childhood, and the military for me gave me a really second chance at life, and I totally embraced it. Loved every opportunity the Marine Corps gave me. A childhood kind of promise that me and my brother had, we were going to be reconnaissance Marines, and so I kept that promise. And in 1993, I went to the Marine Corps at 17. 1 year later, I tried out to be a Recon Marine, and just like the SF program, it's very difficult, high 80% attrition rate, and I was very fortunate to make it through the first time and get to do that job. While there's so many amazing jobs in the military, for me, that job was probably the most fitting place for me. The people there, the schools, I went to, after I became a Recon Marine, I went to every school I could go to. I came to the Army, a lot of Army schools, one being military freefall parachutist, which I loved being on a Halo team, and combat diver, and doing all those great things you get to do in a special operations community. But for years, going in 1993, for years I didn't actually get to do my job, and I was like dying to go do what I was trained to do. And I know we got some spouses here, so you may wonder, like, sometimes why you're husband, you're like, why would you want to go to combat? That didn't even make sense. Like, the only way I know how to describe it is like, imagine having a really nice dress and you get all dressed up and all primped up, but you don't have anywhere to go. Like, that's what it's like when you do all this training at all these schools and you want to go, but there's nowhere to go. And unfortunately, while I joke about that, unfortunately that came at the cost for me at 9/11. And I remember sitting on the couch with my wife, Kathy, and we're watching those planes fly in their World Trade Center buildings. I was a sergeant, a team leader at 3rd Force Recon Company. Being in a unit like that, I mean, you know, like, hey, my life's about to change. Things are about to be different. We're gonna go rectify this. And you know, I thought we were gonna go right away. It ended up being over a year and a half later before I tried out for that JSOC task force and got to deploy. When I got to Afghanistan the first time, I didn't go with my unit like traditionally you would go. I actually, because of the nature of the task force I was on, I went to meet my unit there. So I landed at Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night and met my unit there. But while I was waiting, I was standing on the airfield, and I had this like moment to myself that I look back and I really look back at that moment that I had by myself in that airfield, and I really realized it was a fork in the road. And if I could pinpoint like the things that happened in Afghanistan, the loss of friends, the things that I saw, those things I don't think altered my path into a dark direction as much as a decision I made on that tarmac by myself when I landed there. I remember going to the edge of that perimeter of that base, standing in front of these HESCO barriers, and they had this concertina wire on top. It was pretty primitive perimeter at the time. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking, wow, this is for real. Like, actually, after being in the military almost 10 years, having all this training and all these schools, like I'm really here. And on the other side of this concertina wire is the Taliban. And they're going to try to kill me over the next months, and I'm going to try to kill them. That's what's really about to happen. And the reality of that, like in that moment, I don't know if anybody's ever had that moment before where you kind of anticipate something, and then when it happens, you're like, okay, now it's here, it's real. And I asked myself, like, am I ready to do what the Marine Corps sent me here to do? And I think that's a fair question. If anybody that had that realization would ask themselves, am I ready? And in the military, we talk about resiliency. We talk about the pillars of resiliency, and I said them earlier: mind, body, spirit, social. I know you guys have 5 now in the Army. We have emotional. I'll see if I get it right. They won an Army for me. Emotional, family, physical, and social and spiritual. Right? I got it. Okay, I passed. So, do I get some kind of beret now or something? Okay. So, I'm standing there on that perimeter. I'm looking out, and I'm kind of inventorying myself and saying, am I where I need to be? Mind, mental. Do I have the right mindset to do this job? Yes, I was in the right mindset. I was motivated. I knew my job well. Physical, I was in the best shape of my life. So physically, I was prepared to do my job. Socially, I was with the premier Tier 1 Special Operations unit in the military. Like, I was with the right people. And spiritually, well, I had to wear Christian stamped on my dog tag. And so for me, it was a check. But the truth is, that faith was paper thin and had no substance to be able to sustain something like I was about to get myself into. And on that, I believe on that tarmac, I made a decision that set me up for failure, for my combat readiness, my overall wellness, and my ability to walk away from a place like Afghanistan and continue on as a quality husband and father and human being. I made a decision to put faith on a shelf. I thought that spiritual aspect, that relationship with God, was something that you do when you get older. But in that moment in Afghanistan, I thought I had to choose between being a warrior and being a person of faith. And I believe that's something that many people, particularly in America right now, feel like they have to choose as young people between, especially young men, between masculinity and Christianity. Like, I can't be this like tough, masculine dude that all young men aspire to be. A young Recon Marine or Green Beret or a soldier, and everything that we want to be, but be Christian at the same time. And I believe there's no bigger lie of the enemy, and I say the enemy, Satan, than that, to tell us that we have to trade our masculinity for our Christianity. There is no, from being someone that's spent a lot of time on the battlefield, there is no stronger people in the battlefield that I've ever seen than people of faith. And when I say that, I don't just mean Christians. Because while the Taliban ideology is dark and it's corrupt and it's evil and it's grotesque, if you want to know how they hung for 20 years when we had the best technology and we were kicking their butt in every other area, it was their spiritual resiliency. Again, who they are is disgusting, and their ideologies. But they stayed on the battlefield because of their spiritual resiliency. Right now, I just got back from Ukraine. I was there last week. I was on the front lines with Ukrainian Special Forces, and those guys are true Christ followers. Their passion for God, and they believe they're out there fighting for God and their families. They're like, I see the resiliency and strength in them. I'm like, man, what you guys have over there, like, I want to take back and insert into every American warfighter, because what they have is that spiritual resiliency that I've been spending the last year trying to tell people about, and they have it right now. And it's amazing because they're kicking Russia's butts, and they're like behind on every other level. You talk about the other pillars, like they're behind on every other level, but their spiritual resiliency is so strong and they're so motivated and they're so passionate. So it is a lie, but I believed that I'd choose between the two. And of course, not knowing as a young warrior, I said, man, I'll put faith on the shelf. I'll do that when I get older. Right now, I have to be a warrior. I have to be violent. I have to be mean. I can't be that churchy guy. And that's what I chose to do. And I intentionally put God out of my life. And I believe that left a giant hole inside of me that over the years I filled with rage and hate and anger and bitterness, and a real darkness kind of took over me. And it really eroded me. And it started off with being just really intense, which felt like really good. In Afghanistan, it felt like really good to be intense and violent, especially when you're going to operations against the Taliban and everybody around you is behaving that way. But that intensity started turning into anger and frustration. And I would go home from Afghanistan, and 24 hours later, I'd be checking in at home, and I'm trying to be now a husband and a father and Mr. Rogers, your friendly neighbor. Like, I couldn't flip that switch and not be that angry, intense dude. I was still that guy, and my wife and children, it's always a shame to say, but it's important for me to be honest about, like, my wife and children were not in a safe or happy place. Like, they would say the wrong thing, everybody's walking around with eggshells, and I'd flip out and punch holes in the wall and scream at them like a Marine Corps drill instructor and break things, and I was just a total tyrant to them. One time I was gonna be home for my daughter's birthday, and she was so excited to be home for her birthday, and she's, you know, at the time she's like 12 years old, and I'm watching her like do what she normally does. She's very opinionated, and she's got to pick everything apart. And I got so mad at her because she was saying she didn't like the icing on her cake. Such a simple thing. And I flipped out and picked up my little girl's birthday cake and threw it against the wall and destroyed her birthday in front of all her friends. And I remember in that moment, like thinking, like, what kind of person behaves that way? Like, what kind of dad does something like that? I was totally out of control. But in those moments, I wouldn't like stop, because if I figured I'd stop knowing I was wrong, it was like an admission of guilt. So I would just dig in and prove my point that this is why I'm doing this. Everyone else is the problem, and justify it. And knowing that I was out of control like that, my solution, instead of like correcting that behavior, was just stay as busy as possible. Go as many deployments as possible, go as much training as possible. I could deal with this, just like the faith thing. When I get older, later, I'll deal with it, but I can't deal with it now, because I was justifying my behavior. I'm like, I need to be this person right now. I need to be mean. I need to be violent. I need to be in this mindset, because 3 weeks from now, I'm going to be back in Afghanistan. That's where it was just totally behavior justification. And eventually, that anger and frustration started to manifest in these things that I never thought I would deal with. There were physiological symptoms of PTSD that if anybody would have told me they were dealing with before that, I would have thought that person was weak. I would have said, you know, man, this person's a sissy or whatever. I mean, that'd have been my mindset. And now I'm dealing with it. So because I had that mindset, I was ashamed when I started dealing with it. My arms would go numb, my face would go numb. I'd feel like my throat was swelling shut. I felt like I had like a 1,000-pound weight on my chest and I couldn't breathe. These are signs of panic attacks. And again, I didn't want to go to my peers because they would have thought I was weak. And peer pressured me out of my job. I didn't want to go to mental health because I thought I'd lose my top secret clearance and not be able to do my job anymore. I was really worried about the repercussions. So I thought, I'll just keep this to myself. I'll hide it and try to just push forward. And that's what I did. It didn't work out so well. Those symptoms got much worse. I started having these moments where I was in some really intense times in Afghanistan, and I was having what's called disassociation, where your mind feels like it separates from your body, and you almost see yourself like in a bird's eye view of yourself, a little bit delayed. I would snap out of moments where I felt like I was remembering things instead of actually being present for them. These are really severe signs of anxiety and high stress, and it's very dangerous to do the job I was doing while dealing with that, but I was hiding it pretty well. There was a moment where 12 team members of mine were captured and killed. 10 of them were Afghans, so it may not sound like as big of a deal, but to me it was a huge deal. I mean, these guys were my brothers. I ate dinner in their homes, played soccer with their kids. I lived with them. I would have died for these guys, and they would have died for me. In fact, I do believe they did die for me. When they were captured, a lot of bad things happened, including a vehicle bomb driven into my house. Luckily, I was obviously not in my house. It was a really bad situation. Our operation was somewhat compromised, and we kept trying to operate anyway. I went on one more operation, and during that time, when I got back from it, it was 2 weeks long. I felt like I woke up out of a dream, and I could barely even remember what had happened. And I had made some mistakes that not only was putting my life in danger, but putting other people's lives in danger. And because of that, I spoke up and said something. I was sent home to go to mental health, and after I seen a clinical psychologist, I was diagnosed with severe chronic PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. That was the diagnosis, and as I feared, I was immediately read out of my program. When you have a clearance and in a program like that, you get read out, means you can't do your job anymore, and that was it for me for doing that job, and I was devastated. So I was really dealing with two different things. One, the level of panic attacks I was having was completely debilitating. I hear people say sometimes, like, I was in traffic the other day and I had a panic attack. I'm not dismissing that, but I'm saying that's not what I'm talking about. Like, when I would have panic attacks, like I was 1,000% convinced like I was going to die in that moment. Like I couldn't breathe, like I felt like my heart was gonna stop. I'd go to the emergency room, my blood pressure would be 200/130. Like I was physically feeling like I was going to die. The medicine they gave me made me feel like it was going to kill me as well. I felt like the medicine was making it worse. And then they changed my medicine, and I felt like a zombie. I didn't like the medication. On top of dealing with all this panicking and the physiological symptoms, I was ashamed. I had worked my whole life to be in that job, in that position, and put a lot into it. And I was very proud of it. All my identity was tied into that. I mean, from going to the Marine Corps to going to infantry school and Recon, and then making the Force Recon, which, to make it to Recon is like very difficult. And to go to Force, that's like the top 25% of the Recon guys go to Force. And then to get selected to go to JSOC, there was only 6 of us that year that got to go. And so I worked my whole life to get there. And then the game-winning play, I failed. I mean, it was like if I played football and came from Little League and went to varsity high school and into college and in the pros and the NFL and made it to a Super Bowl, which would never happen because I'm 5'3", but you get the point, right? I worked my whole life to get there, and I failed. I was embarrassed, and I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to associate with the military. And so my wife and my counselor were trying to find something for me to do to snap me out of it. And he talked me into getting those wrestling mats and training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is something I did my whole life. I'd say I did it since I was little, but I'm still little. I did it since I was 5 years old. I started judo and wrestling when I was young. Did it my whole life. I fought professionally on the side while I was in the military, and I was pretty good at it. I was undefeated. And so when I got on those mats the first time I started grappling, I felt like I found the cure, because you can't think about Afghanistan and train at the same time or your buddy's going to beat you up. So you have to be focused and you have to be mentally present, which I think is a good thing with any kind of physical activity for someone that's struggling with anxiety. But you could take a medicine for being sick, and you could abuse that medicine. And that's what I did with jiu-jitsu. I think jiu-jitsu was good for me. And again, like she said, I actually just got my 4th degree black belt. It's something I've been doing. I love doing, but I took something good for me and I abused it. And again, I love jiu-jitsu, working with veterans, chaplain, working in ministry. It's like super stressful, and you have some bad days in the office. And when I do, I go to the gym and I find like some 20-year-old stud and I choke him out. It makes me feel better. I recommend you try it. And get back to, by the way, there's no better time to minister to people than when you're choking the hell out of them. But I took this good thing and I totally took advantage of it. And it created this weird trajectory in my life because I put so much time into it. I was extremely successful professionally. And I think outside of being an MMA fighter, you could probably think about your military careers. While I was putting all this effort into it, I won a world title. I was ranked number 6 in the world. I was 18-2. I opened the gym. 18-2 is a tough record for MMA. Opened the gym, and I had like 1,000 students. So my professional trajectory was like here, which is a lot of you that are still in, right? If you're in the military for a while, your professional trajectory is here. But my personal life was here. And it was happening at the same time. And it was no coincidence they were, because I'm putting more energy into one than the other. I'm putting energy into things that are temporary and superficial, which obviously our jobs in the military are important, but so is our families. And I was putting all the effort and not putting any effort into my family or getting well. And so on the surface, I looked extremely successful, but behind that false facade of success was a very broken person, still dealing with panic attacks, anxiety, depression. My family was still dealing with a tyrant at home. And I was really, my marriage was really suffering. And to the point to where I slept at the gym many nights, at a friend's house. Maybe my kids are on. My wife and I would say the loneliest place we've ever been is in our own bedroom with our backs turned towards each other, and it's just a total dead marriage. And that's where we were. And a lot of girls around sports. And it didn't take long for me to walk outside of our marriage and relationships with other women. I ended up in a full affair, and I wasn't even trying to hide it, to be honest with you. I kind of wanted it to come out. And so when my wife found out, then I was just like, okay, well, the solution is we get divorced. Like, that's the solution. We don't like each other anyway. And so we made a decision to get divorced. We filed for divorce. We sold our home and moved in 2 separate apartments. And my wife and I had 2 very different reactions in that when that happened. My wife came into a church, and really she just wanted to be around a real positive place. And in that church, in that time there, that 3 months we were separated, she started praying for me. And for me, you look back at the time, you think, while I was betraying her that way in an affair, and well, how could she be praying for me? And she said she would pray, God, let me see Chad the way you see Chad. God, let me love Chad the way you love Chad. Let me forgive Chad the way you forgave Chad. That's what she would pray for me while I was doing this to her. People said that she would go standing right here in the pulpit and in the church, because we were a part of that same church today. She would go in the left side of the wall in the middle of the week, not on Sundays, and she would stand there and pray for me and collapse because she was too weak to even stand crying. And meanwhile, I'm like separated from her, and I'm like, I don't have to deal with this woman anymore. Within 2 days, I had a bachelor pad like set up, and I signed up for this big fight on Strike Force on Showtime, and 2 totally different reactions between her and I. And I just was immediately wanting to move on. While I'm training for this fight, I felt like I had a real clear focus and something in front of me, because I was able to train. There's a lot of tension, people telling me everything I wanted to hear and kind of lifting me up. And so I'm training for this fight. And if anybody's a fight fan, at that time I was 16-0. I had submitted everyone, so I finished all my opponents. And I was fighting this young up-and-coming fighter named Robichaux de Leon, who's a really good striker. And obviously, me submitting everyone, I'm a good grappler. And so it's kind of a contrast of styles. We fought on Showtime, live on Showtime at a Toyota Center in Houston, Texas, a big venue, 10,000 people. And I remember us fighting, and literally, if you're a fight fan, every round we knocked each other down. It's the kind of fight you want to see. As a fighter, it's the kind of fight you want to be a part of. Like every round, he'd punch me in the face, knock me down. Every round, I'd kick him in the head and knock him down. It was back and forth, and because I got hit so many times, when we get to the end, I'm like, this is my first time going to decision. I don't even know what happens. I don't know if I won or not. And the first judge calls the fight for Robichaux de Leon, and I'm thinking, I just lost my first fight. And second judge calls it for me, so it's gonna be a split decision. And I'm waiting to see what happens, and the third judge calls it for me. And I win the fight by split decision. My hands raised, all the weight and pressure of that fight comes off. And I'm happy, obviously, for a moment. But that moment kind of faded, because when there's 10,000 people cheering and you're kind of sitting in the middle of that auditorium, it's very loud and kind of deafening. But everything kind of got quiet for a moment. There's like time stands still. If anybody's ever had it, that you kind of feel like you're separate from everything that's happening. Like 10,000 people cheering, and everything just came down to just me being there. And I'm thinking, like, all these people cheering, and not one of them was Kathy, my wife. She had been at all my fights before, and she wasn't there that night. And that reality made me think, like, man, my family is like devastated right now, and I just fought so hard for this stupid win on my record, one more MMA fight, and I'm not willing to fight like that for my family. And I probably walked out of that cage that night with my head held low and went home to my apartment, and I was laying in my bed, and my mind was spinning, and I started thinking, like, there's nothing for me to look forward to. The last 3 months has been this fight. Now, I don't have kids at home. My wife's not there. I just don't have anything to look forward to. It's just the first time in my life I felt like there was nothing in front of me. And this thought came over me that maybe my family would be sad without me, but they would be better off. Maybe my family would be sad without me, but they'd be better off. And I'm sure you guys know that same hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of over 20 veterans every single day. That maybe a family or loved ones would be sad without them, but they'd be better off. And by the way, we don't even know what the number is right now, because in the last 2 years, the suicide hotline has went up 1,000%. So we don't really even know what the numbers are right now, but one is too many. But I had made the decision that I was to take my life. I would sit in my closet in my apartment. I put my family pictures on the floor, kind of around me, and I'd look at those pictures, maybe like to say goodbye. Sometimes I'd cry. I'd pick up I had a Glock 22 pistol, and I'd put the pistol to my head. I'd even take the time to kind of position it so it'd be fast. Obviously, I know what a gun does. But something would happen every time I put that gun to my head and I was ready to actually squeeze that trigger off. I'd have this vision of who's going to find me. And I believe that was divine that happened that way, that God put that vision in my mind of who's going to find me. Someone was going to hear that gunshot in an apartment, or I'd be missing. Someone was going to find me. And the only other person that had a key to my apartment was my oldest son, Hunter, who was 13 at the time. And I thought, man, like, I can't have my son find me that way. So that was enough to pump the brakes in that moment. But I was in such a dark place, I'd be back the next, like, hours later or the next day. I didn't want anybody to know. I just wanted to do it. Like being on the roof of a burning building, like, you just want to jump. Like that's the level of imminence that I felt. I just wanted it to be over. I didn't want to feel that way anymore. And I wanted to relieve them of that as well. And there was one morning I was in that closet with my pistol, and I heard a knock on my door. And I wasn't going to answer it, but when I heard my wife's voice announce herself, I kind of panicked because I felt like I'd been caught. Even though she would have never came in that closet and saw that gun, I hid it under her blanket. And then I went to the door and opened the door, and I just immediately just tore into her. And, you know, it's weird. It may sound weird and twisted, but I was just so angry that she was there to interrupt me killing myself. I was like, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. And I was just yelling at her, asking her what she was doing there. And she's not a very calm person, by the way. We both are pretty calm now, but at that time in our life, she was not a very calm person. But for some reason, in that moment, she was extremely calm. And she started telling me some things that radically changed my life. And what she really kind of summarized it, what she really said was, how could you do all the things you've done in the military and as an athlete, right? And she's seen me from we met at 17 and 18. She saw me become a Recon Marine. She saw me go through schools and training and deployment workups and all the discipline it took to do the things in the military that we do. She saw me train for the fights, like banged up, broken, going training with guys like doing rounds with 5 fresh guys that are bigger than me and to train for these fights, and lose like 35 pounds of weight, cutting weight to make weights for fights, and look like a Holocaust victim with like bones on my face. Like the discipline it takes to do the things I did in my life. She's like, how could you do all of that, and when it comes to your family, you'll quit? And I don't know about you guys, but there's no more soul-cutting word to me than to be called a quitter. And she was absolutely right. I've been successful at professional things when it came to the most important things. Being a husband, being a father, being a young 17-year-old kid that raised his hand and said he wanted to do something important with his life. I quit all those things, including my own will to live. And I'm a pretty radical decision maker. So in that moment, I'm like, all right, she's right. I need to take those same skills and disciplines and attributes and pull things back together. And I decided to get back in the fight. But one thing I knew is that I couldn't do it with the people, I couldn't do it alone, and I couldn't do it with the people I surrounded myself by. I had pretty much, looking at my life, I had pretty much systematically surrounded myself with everyone that told me what I wanted to hear and no one that told me what I needed to hear. And I had no accountability in my life. It was pretty easy for me to do, being a jiu-jitsu black belt and a fighter. Like, I kind of controlled my space. And I think there's no more dangerous place for a person to be in this world, worse than Iraq or Afghanistan, particularly for men to be in a world without accountability. And I really had none. And I knew I needed someone to help me outside of my circle. And so I didn't care about church at the time. I wasn't pursuing God. But I asked my wife, is there someone in this church you're going to that could help hold me accountable to this decision to pull things back together? She called the church, and a man that answered on call was named Steve Toth. Steve wasn't an MMA fighter or a military guy or anything, but I met him at a Starbucks coffee shop. And while I'm sitting down with him, I had slid over my plan to pull my life together. It was a 5-paragraph order, right, a military-style operations order, and I was super proud of it, and I smelled it, slid it over to him, like, hey, check this out. I'm going to fix my life. Really showed this to my wife because I'm trying to win her back now. And he put his hand on that paper, didn't even read it, and slid it back over to me and told me I was going to fail. I remember being, like, really offended, like, you didn't even read this. Like, I put work into this. You're supposed to show this to my wife, and you're telling me I'm going to fail? And I'll never forget his words. He tapped on that paper. He said, this plan doesn't have anything to do with your relationship with God. I'm not going to waste your time, and I'm not going to let you waste mine. And, we had tried, I say we, me and my wife had tried everything to fix my situation. I had been on all the medication. I had been through the counseling. I had been through different programs and camps, like military ones, VA ones, the civilian ones, all nonprofit ones. I've been to all these different things to try to fix my situation. I even had professional success as an athlete and notoriety and financial success, all those things, some good things, some bad things, but none of those things that changed my situation. And we have a saying at Mighty Oaks that came out of this moment: if what you're doing isn't working, then why not try something different, right? If what you're doing in your life to change your situation isn't working, why not try something different? And so I decided to trust this man, Steve, and I surrendered my life to Christ. And beyond that decision, by the way, I didn't really even know what I was doing in that moment. I just knew that I tried everything else. What do I have to lose? Beyond the decision, Steve mentored me for an entire year in biblical living. And what that really meant for me was the realization that it really brought me to this realization that all these bad things that happened to me, my childhood, Afghanistan, burying 15 friends over 8 deployments, like, and the first being Foster Harrington, who we did 10 years together. He served my wedding, and we were in the same units for 10 years. We were like best friends, and in our first deployment, he was, shot and killed. I mean, like, all this pain and these bad things that happened to me, as bad as those things were, those things didn't lead me to be in that closet with a pistol in my hand. What led me there were the choices that I made in response to those things. And I never lost control of the ability to choose and make good choices moving forward. And so, as cliche as it may sound, the realization of all that made me realize that I didn't have to let my past define my future. I could choose a different future moving forward. Now, did I still have anxiety and depression and moments of anger and frustration? Of course I did. I'm human, and I was coming out of some bad things. But the difference now was that the choices I was making were based on biblical principles and not my own emotions and reactions. And the result was obviously much, much different. And so the Bible became a blueprint for how to recalibrate my life. And I was very intentional about it and very deliberate about it. And I had this really good mentor in my life that has helped keep me on track. And the result of that, after about a year, and it's still, I say a year and growing now, but the first year, the result of that ended up being restoration of my own brokenness, and with PTSD and anxiety. I was able to get off of all that medicine I was on. I found restoration in my marriage. Me and Kathy have been married 27 years now. All three of our children are, two Marines. Both are in ministry now. They both have, all three of my kids are married. I have a grandbaby and one on the way. Like, my family was restored from that decision. My brokenness and that's PTSD and anxiety was restored from that decision. Of just repairing that spiritual pillar and finally having that spiritual pillar solidified in my life. And then through that, I also found hope for the first time in a very long time. And I think the end result of all of it for me was finding purpose again. Because look, we were created to have purpose. You could be a Christian or not a Christian. I don't know where everybody's faith is in here. I'm not going to assume just because we're in a chapel that you're all Christians. But regardless of what you believe, you were created, and you were created to have purpose. And without purpose in your life, you will wither up and die. If you want to know why veterans take their lives all the time, it's not because of what we've seen or did in the military. Not at all. I mean, most of us that had the chance to kill bad guys will go out and shoot bad guys in the face again today. Like, that's what we do. And they're bad people. But that's not what leads us to suicide and depression. What does is the fact that we had a clear mission. We had a clear purpose. And one day we woke up and we felt like the mission and purpose was gone. And we don't have anything to move forward to the next day. We have to have purpose in our lives. Mark Twain says it like this: the two most important days in a person's life are the day that they're born and the day that they find out why. When Steve Toth introduced me to life that I believe God created me to live, I found out the why. And honestly, it's part of it is being here today to share with this morning and this afternoon and with you guys tonight, like sharing that why. And that why is be able to pay one lesson, pay it forward, like one generational warrior to the next, like the lessons I've learned and the truth about what spiritual resiliency really means, it has meant in my life and would mean in each of yours. And that purpose really manifested for me in a deep burden that I believe God put in my heart to share that message with other warriors. And the last 7 years, I've committed my life to doing that. And we started Mighty Oaks Foundation. One of the primary things we started with Mighty Oaks was the legacy program to take people who are dealing with the same things that I dealt with, whether in combat or in life, and help them recalibrate their lives, simply the lives that God created us to live, by understanding the biblical principles, by saying, hey, when I'm dealing with these things, what's the right choice to make? What's the biblical choice to make to land in the right spot? And we do about 35 of those camps a year. Over the last 11 years, we had 4,300 graduates. But we're doing about 1,000 per year now, so it's been exponential growth. All of it is for free, by the way. We even pay for the airfare. We do about $6 million a year in programming, all paid for by a grateful nation who donates to us. And it's available for anybody here, anybody listening. It's all of our active duty service members, veterans, spouses, first responders, and we'll be doing 35 camps this year. So you can, if you're listening, you go to mightyoaksprograms.org, apply, and you'll be taken care of. And I think from what I understand today on the base, I know it's with most commands, you don't even have to take leave. You can get administrative leave to go for self-development. On top of that, we do these resiliency events. Over the last 11 years, I've been able to speak to 250,000 troops and give away about 150,000 copies of our books and resources. So we've been able to do that to help be preventative of these situations and these incidents that people have in our veteran community. And then I've taken the successes that we've had at Mighty Oaks through faith-based programs to Washington, D.C., testified before Congress and Senate. We've worked at the Pentagon and with the VA. I was appointed to be the chairman of the Faith-Based Coalition for Veterans Affairs, and we were able to get executive order signed to bring faith programs back in the VA and DoD, so you guys would have that solution. In the prevents bill, we were able to put language in the prevents bill to bring faith programs back in to really empower the chaplains and have those programs more readily available. And it's been a battle, but we've had a tremendous amount of success in the last 4 or 5 years doing that. And then, that was kind of where I thought my journey would end in growth, but God always has different plans. I thought Mighty Oaks was like, this is what God called me to do. And God had never really stirred my heart for anything else in the last 11 years. And until this past June or July is where it really started changing for me. Mother Teresa has a quote. She says, God will never give you more than you can handle, but I just wish you didn't trust me so much. And I learned that quote, a hard lesson, that quote this last year. God really started burning my heart for the people of Afghanistan when I seen we were going to leave Afghanistan. And certainly won't get political here, but I did not agree that we were going to leave the way we left, and I think most of us did not. And Aziz, of all the Afghans there, Aziz was there. And for the last 6 years, I've been trying to get Aziz and his family, his wife and 6 kids out with a special immigrant visa process. And it's supposed to take 9 months. It was a promise to our allies that served with us. Aziz had served 8 deployments with me and over 15 years with special operations. He saved my life on 3 occasions specifically, probably saved my life every day, but 3 occasions specifically. I've seen him save the lives of many special operators on operations, and I mean, he's the most patriotic guy I know, and he had never been to America. He loved America. He hated the Taliban and wanted freedom for his country. He wanted his daughters to be able to go to school and put their hair down, and that's what he wanted for other Afghan girls, and he was like the real deal. I mean, he would never let me, I had tons more experience in training than him. We could be in like Pakistan, we were in Pakistan all the time, or some Taliban village. He would never let me go around the corner without him being first, because it was his responsibility to take care of me. And that's just who he was. And I could not fathom like sitting back on a couch and watching the withdrawal on the news and knowing that I left Aziz behind. Without being able to get him on a special immigrant visa out, I said, I have to go and get him. I talked to my wife, and we're going to go get Aziz. And I called a bunch of my buddies that I was in the special operations community with. Some were still in some government agencies. We would take some leaves of absence from government agencies to go and get Aziz and his family. But as we started planning our operation, we recognized that it was probably a little selfish that we'd go there and get Aziz and his family and not this group of 3,500 orphans. And then when we realized that this group of 3,500 orphans needed help, we were like, wait, if we're going to do this, then let's make as big of an impact as we can. There's Americans there. There's more interpreters and their families. There's women and children and that are going to be vulnerable, and Christians that are going to be persecuted. Let's get as many people as we can. Luckily, we had some great connections still in the Joint Chiefs, and we got permission to go to HKIA, the Kabul airport, where the evacuations were happening. And then we also knew we needed the resources to pull this off, so we used some of our relationships to go to the UAE and meet with the royal family there. The UAE is the United Arab Emirates, for those who don't know. And we used our connections there. Gave about an hour-long brief, and after about an hour-long brief, they were convinced that we were going to be able to pull off what we claimed we could. And they gave us 2 C-17 planes and a humanitarian center there. And if you evacuate someone from a country and don't have a visa, you have to have a place to bring them. You can't just smuggle human beings out. So you had to have a humanitarian center. So that's what we had set up. And also Glenn Beck, if you guys know who Glenn Beck is, Glenn Beck raised a ton of money for flights, and he gave us about $20 million of those flights. And we raised probably about $30 million, over $3 million in the first week of raising money to do this. So we had everything we needed to pull it off. We landed in, and that's, by the way, for that to happen, all that happened in like 4 days. So I'm not patting myself on the back at all. I'm not smart enough to have the capability to do that. It was completely God orchestrated the way it happened. There's no way, if people keep asking me how it happened, I'm like, I can't explain it. You have to ask God one day when you get there, because it just happened. We got to Abu Dhabi and put our team in HKIA, and we were going outside the wire in 3-man teams to grab people. And the first day we got Aziz, his wife, and the 6 kids, plus 183 people. The next day we got 800 people. The next day 1,000. And so we were being successful. The Joint Chiefs were clearing our manifest. We're getting him in the Abu Dhabi in a humanitarian center. And then after that, it kind of became a blur, because we didn't know how many days we'd have left. We just knew that people were dying every day, and we didn't want to stop and rest. So we just pushed through. I mean, our team was sleeping like, one of my guys lost 37 pounds in 10 days. Like, we were just nonstop, not sleeping and eating and just getting as many people as we could. At the end of that 10 days, when the Abbey Gate was blown up and the U.S. military subsequently left right after that, we had got out 12,000, a little over 12,000 people, and we made a decision that we couldn't leave. We had just seen and knew too much. Of course, the military had to, but we didn't have to. And we chose, we said, hey, there's still Americans here, interpreters, there's vulnerable people, we're gonna stay. And so we started flying people out of a place called Mazar Sharif, and flew another 5,000 people out. And then we were not able to fly people out anymore, and all these people had moved to Panjshir Valley, like women and children, and they were kind of jammed up in Panjshir Valley. And if you know anything about the geography of that area, the mountains are like 25,000 feet. There's deep like valleys that push out to the Panjshir River, and then that's the border there, Tajikistan. On that border was like saturated with Taliban, and Chinese military, by the way, was just all over that border. Russian military, Tajikistan military. That border was not a place that anybody could cross. If you were like a family trying to evacuate and you go across that, spend maybe a week making it through a valley, and then at the end you might hit a cliff or another mountain, or the Taliban or a Chinese or you come across in this river that's a Category 5 rapids river, like you would need information in advance to know how to cross. And so myself and another Marine named Dennis Price, he's currently one of the 3-time Force Recon Team Leader of the Year, just a really incredible human being. We decided to go out and do a border reconnaissance of that area to provide that information to help people be able to cross the Panjshir River. And we did in 10 days, we did about 90 miles of border reconnaissance and did about 6 routes, we call them fording reps, where you cross and figure out what's the best way to cross and gather all the information and push it back. And it's kind of one of the jobs of a Recon Marine, so it's kind of old school job. We knew how to do well. And literally like every night for 10 days, we'd swim across into Afghanistan, across the Panjshir River, and build those routes to get out. There was so many checkpoints. And literally, like one night we swam across, and there was like a Taliban checkpoint here with 3 Taliban soldiers, and over on this side was a Chinese BMP mechanized vehicle with a spotlight for people swimming across the river, and a PKM right next to it to shoot people that are swimming across the river. So that's kind of what the environment was like. And I say that not to brag about our mission. I say that for this. As we were preparing to go there and go do that, and by the way, I don't know how many people were able to use those routes, but I know it saved a lot of people. But as I was preparing to go there and do this, it was a lot different than going to the airport in Kabul and doing the evacuations. I knew that I was gonna be by myself with one other person. We're gonna land in this country. We're gonna drive 11 hours across the mountains and go to where the Chinese and Russians and Taliban were and swim across the river in Afghanistan. And so while I'm flying there to do that, my mind started spinning. And I started thinking about what I talked about today. I started thinking about resiliency and readiness. And I'm like, for the last 11 years, I've been talking about me going to Afghanistan the first time and having 3 of those pillars, but the 4th one, the spiritual one, not really having it. And how it almost cost me everything because I didn't have that spiritual pillar. I always like to explain like a 4-legged chair, which most chairs have 4 legs, and how all 4 of those legs represent mind, body, spirit, social. And you can see them all, but as soon as you put weight on one, if one of them's weak, it's gonna break. And that's what had happened with me. I didn't have that spiritual pillar. So for 11 years, I've been going around talking about it, and I really believed it so much that I never thought about that I'd never tested it. It was always kind of in theory for me. And I spoke to 250,000 troops saying this, and it kind of hit me like, I never actually tested it. I believed it so passionately, I was convinced of it. And now I'm on an airplane flying to this country, and I'm gonna swim across in Afghanistan. I'm 46 years old, by the way. You guys, the uniforms on, should still be doing that, but you guys weren't allowed to, so the veteran community had to do it for us. And even right before I got dropped off at the airport, my wife and I, she was like, why are you gonna do this? And I was trying to explain to her that we have to. Like, our military's not allowed to. We have to do this. And if it was us, if it was my wife and my children that were here, and the same thing was happening, I sure would hope someone from somewhere around the world would come and help us. And so how could we not do that for them? These 40 million victims in Afghanistan. And so I really believe that God had burdened my heart to do it. And so I'm sitting on that plane, and I start thinking about the theory of it, and then I start thinking man, what if these symptoms remanifest? What if I get out there and something triggers that to happen again? What if I have my blood pressure go up to 200 over 130? What if I have a panic attack? What if I can't what if I am a liability to Dennis, my teammate? Like, what if this stuff happens again when I get to that river? And I just prayed, because that's what I've been teaching everybody else to do. I just prayed. I memorized Psalm 23 a long time ago when in moments of distress, and I just prayed and thought of it word for word. And when I finished that prayer on that plane, this peace came over me, and the Apostle Paul talks about a peace that's beyond comprehension and understanding. This peace just came over me, and I felt totally calm. I went from like that anxiety started to ramp up to where I was just totally calm. And I thought, you know what? This isn't something that I was just talking about. It's something I really believe. And I said, God, if you burden my heart to do this, to go help these people, and you orchestrated me being here, because by the way, to do something like that, to get to a place like that with all the restrictions there were, is not easy to do. God opened those doors for me to do that. If you open all the doors for me to be here to do this, then I need you to keep me from facing the anxiety. I need you to keep me from facing the fear. I need you to let me do this job to help these people like you called me to do. And I had this immediate peace. And through that week, Dennis and I, who's also a Christian, we prayed every time before we swam across that river. And I'm saying this with not boasting on myself at all. I'm boasting on God for this. I never felt fear one time. Dennis says the same thing. We never felt fear one time. We were within, many times in the middle of the night, within 50 yards of the Taliban by ourselves, unarmed, and swimming across that river. I never felt anxiety or stress. I never got tired. We only slept 2 hours a night for 10 days. I never even felt tired. I felt so sharp, and we were able to do exactly what we went there to do. And so I say that to say, on the other side of my first experience of Afghanistan, of going there in the best shape of my life, the most motivated I could possibly be, with the best team at JSOC, the NSW team I was with there, but not having that spiritual pillar, things fell apart in my life. But this time, 46 years old, my body's not quite what it used to be. I'm pretty banged up. My mind's not as sharp as it used to be. Socially, like the team I was with, I love Dennis, but he's not a JSOC task force. The only thing I really had going for me was that spiritual pillar. And we did exactly what we were supposed to do. And I walked away from that with something inside of me that I didn't have in those other 8 deployments. And so now I could say, without theory, of all those pillars, those 4 pillars of resiliency, the strongest one, the most solidified one, the one that'll carry you when the rest fail, is our spiritual pillar for me through a relationship with Christ. And I can say that with complete confidence because I just lived it. I was in Ukraine last week, driving past smoldering tanks and having that peace that I know I'm there because I'm right in it. There's no safer place on the planet to be within the will of God. And so I'll tell you the same thing that I told all the troops that I spoke with today. You know, with these pillars of resiliency, if you could just take a moment by yourself, not now, but today or tonight, or just really inventory your life. You know, like, be honest with yourself, and I've done this many times. You know, am I where I'm supposed to be? Mentally, physically, spiritually, socially. Like, is my mind where am I motivated? Am I in the right mindset? Do I have the right attitude? Physically, am I, in the right state of health that I should be in? Socially, you can't always pick who you work with, but you can pick who you let speak into your life. Am I surrounding myself with the right people? And spiritually, do you have that relationship with God? Do you have that strong spiritual foundation? If the answer is no to any one of those, then I would challenge you to be intentional about rectifying those things. I really believe the military gets a lot of things wrong, and the military does a lot of things right, and they put stuff like this on PowerPoint slides, and it seems cheesy, and we just kind of roll our eyes at it and move on. But they got this one right. If you have those 4 pillars of resiliency in your life, I believe that you could sustain anything that you're going to do in this job, in military service, and in life. Our commanders want one thing from us. If they're doing what they're supposed to do, they want combat readiness. Over anything else, they need to have you combat ready. That's why you joined, to be able to go out and defend people that can't defend themselves and defend our nation's interests. They need you to be combat ready. Combat readiness is wellness. It's resiliency. And that's on an individual level, not a unit level. Units can put stuff together like this, but it's on an individual level. And it's you making that choice to say, hey, I'm going to have the tools it takes to, when I find myself on the X in life, I'm going to be able to move forward because I'm mentally, physically, spiritually, and socially resilient and prepared. And it can't be on the surface. There has to be some depth to it. So, Chaplain, because it's a small group here, I'm willing to answer any questions or anything before we wrap it up. That's okay? Okay. So I'll wrap it up with that, guys. But I do ask that your prayers for Ukraine, because I'm going to be going back to Ukraine, and especially for the Ukrainian people. They really deserve and need those prayers. They have a world superpower destroying neighborhoods. Regardless of what you see in the news, I've seen it with my own eyes, like destroying neighborhoods like we live in. It's insane and it's horrific. And it's very, and these people just need our prayers. So with that said, any questions you guys have at all?
I'm curious, are you still operating to pull people out of Afghanistan, or is that operation ceased at this point?
You know, we were trying up until a month ago, and because of the rules of the State Department, I'll be careful what I say here, not bash people, but the rules of the State Department have pretty much shut down any effort to be able to get people out of Afghanistan. I physically could go into Afghanistan and rescue people right now, but I would not have a place to bring them. The humanitarian centers have been shut down. Can't add more people to them. No one will give a visa. So our State Department is telling people not to give visas to other countries to get visas. So there's no visas for them. So without a visa, you can't get them out. So it's terrible. We want to still help, but we can't. Our hands have been tied until a humanitarian center opens its doors to the Afghans, or a country's willing to give them visas. Then they're not no one's gonna be able to continue to help legally, and you know, I don't think anybody's willing to, you know, human traffic people out of a country. Even so, like some of the ones that we brought out of Afghanistan or at the humanitarian center, we still have 7,000 in the humanitarian center that the State Department hasn't moved out, and these are people that were manifested, approved manifest by the Joint Chiefs. So they probably have to move all of them first. So.
You mentioned the orphans in Afghanistan. I'm just curious what that process was and where they are now.
Yeah, so there was a lot of orphans moved out of Afghanistan. A lot of them went to Doha and came to the States. I know your question's probably because you want one. Everybody, I get about 20 emails a day from women that want an Afghan baby, including from my wife. She's emailing me under pseudonames. But because of they're coming from Muslim country, they're not allowing most of these Christians wanting to adopt. They're not allowing it. There has been one case of a Christian family that successfully adopted Afghan, so only one case so far. So we're hoping that one case opens the door. But as of right now, none of the adoption organizations that have been given the contracts to do this will allow Christian families to adopt Afghan babies. And so if it happens, I'll be the first to know because my wife is like tracking it.
Let me know too.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else, guys? Yes?
Switching gears a little bit, PTSD is a word that we throw around pretty freely in
Yeah.
parts. For family members who suspect that they have a loved one who is experiencing PTSD, what's a good way to open a dialogue with them?
Yeah, so I kind of picked up two things in your question. So one, PTSD is something that's very thrown around now. It's a very common term now, the post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a lot of debate, including I wrote a book in the back that you guys could have a copy of. Is notice the D small, because I don't believe it's a disorder. Our body's responding. Basically, the common definition, it's not the clinical definition, but the common definition is our body's normal response to an abnormal situation. So our body's responding normally. It's the situation that's abnormal. So that's not a disorder at all. Your body's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And as a person that believes I was created, my body's doing exactly what it's created and designed to do in order to protect me from facing that incident again. My body starts, the limbic system starts adapting to protect you from danger. And so it's a very natural response. And the way your limbic system responds and the way your body responds to being triggered to trauma, if you numb it with medication, I'm not against medication, there's a time and place for it, but if you numb the medication, and the reason I say numb it, because we have guys that come to Mighty Oaks on the average of 18 pills a day for PTSD, that's numbing the symptoms, they're not getting better. Your body can't recalibrate. And so, for example, if you were in a Humvee with 4 people and you're driving down Jalalabad Road in Batakoot, Afghanistan, and you pass a little red Corolla, and as you drive by it explodes, and 4 of your teammates die, and now 5 years later, you're back in Bayersville, Iowa, driving down Main Street, and you pass a little red Corolla, and all of a sudden your heart rate goes up. You get irritable, and your palms start sweating, and you can't breathe. That's not a disorder at all. You don't need 20 pills a day to fix that. You need to drive past a little red Corolla and let your body do exactly what God designed it to do, to say, oh wait, it wasn't dangerous, it didn't explode. And you go, your body recalibrates. The human body has an incredible ability to recalibrate. And so I think there's a lot of education. I mean, that's one of, like, I teach on this all the time, but that's one example of like how misunderstood PTSD is. And that book I wrote in the back, it's like maybe a 45-minute read. It kind of talks about some of that stuff. I do a brief, hour-long brief on that subject, PTSD, and the creation perspective of it. But I really believe educating yourself, the best education I've found on it is actually not because I'm a Christian, but it's just the best education I found on it. It's through the American Association of Christian Counselors. They have a course called PTSD Care and Counsel. I always encourage chaplains to go through that course because it's really in depth. It talks about the physiological effects, the limbic system, what's actually happening in the body by design, and it really gives you a lot of education on looking at things and say, oh, my body's doing what it's supposed to do. It's not broken, and I don't have to medicate it this way. So I think the education is the key answer to that. As far as dealing with someone that's struggling, what we tend to want to do as humans is we want to fix that person because we love them, we care about them, they're broken, and we can see it. We can see what they can't see. So we're like, let me help you, let me fix you. And then you get this pushback like, hey, I don't need to be fixed, I'm not messed up, right? And so what I've always encouraged people to do, and I do this myself, and it's part of our methodology at Mighty Oaks, is when you want to help someone that's struggling with something, PTSD, whatever, instead of trying to fix them or asking them what's wrong or them trying to provoke them to talk to you, is demonstrate vulnerability and transparency. So instead of, sit down and have a cup of coffee with them, instead of asking them what they're dealing with, tell them about a time that you struggled and failed and had to overcome something, and demonstrate vulnerability with them and transparency. And what people tend to do is replicate that. Now they feel like, okay, you gave me something, I'm going to give a little bit back, and you build off of that. What we do at Mighty Oaks is the first thing they do when they get there. By the way, when everyone shows up, like 50% of them would say they're not Christians, and even though it's a faith-based program. We always say that the veterans show up with this like PTSD starter kit. They got the baseball cap, the sunglasses on, a cane, a knee brace, and some kind of nonprofit T-shirt. So, and they're all backed in a corner, and no one wants to talk to each other. And so we have to be able to take them out of that really quickly because we have 6 days to do what we do. And it's miraculous to see what happens. But one of the first things we do is that we demonstrate vulnerability and transparency. So right when they get the in-brief and they get told what they're doing, what their week's going to be, we have one of our recent graduates come up, and we've worked with them to be able to do it, and they're going to share their story. And they're going to be so vulnerable and so transparent that it'll be probably something never seen another human being do before, and it's going to be almost uncomfortable, and they're going to be like, wow, actually, this is a place where people are going to be honest. And then the next class they get, our instructor gives the class, and we have a curriculum, but they're going to give that class from their personal testimony and their personal perspective, and they're being vulnerable. So they start demonstrating vulnerability and transparency, and by the end of maybe day 3 is when they have the opportunity to give back, and they almost feel out of place by holding them back. And so create that environment. We do it at a program level, but you can create that on an individual level. And that's what I found to be the best thing. You could always kind of seed that with doing that, but put some resources in their hands. I have a book that I didn't bring here, but you can get it. We'll mail anything we have on our website free to you guys if you email us. There's a book called An Unfair Advantage that I've written. It's a full-size book, and it's really kind of my story. And every story has like a story from Afghanistan and combat, and then I have a parallel biblical story that I think I have one copy right here. I'll show you. It has like a parallel biblical story inside of it. And the reason I wrote this book is because I go speak at like churches and stuff like that, and I'd always have like a spouse or a family member saying, man, I wish my so-and-so would be here, but he would never come to a church, or he would never come to an event like this, and he would never go to a program like yours. And so I wrote that book to start off as like super warrior stuff up front, and kind of goes deeper and deeper and deeper into getting well towards the end. And it kind of takes them on this journey to make a decision to get better. So that's what I wrote that book for, as a tool for that. So we have a lot of resources like that. If you go on our website, on our media page, we have a lot of videos of testimonial stuff. You can send them stuff like that. Kind of seed that with you kind of creating that environment to be vulnerable to them. So that's my very long answer to that. Yep. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Chaplain, for hosting this tonight. Thank you, sir. Oh, that's beautiful.
So one thing we have for Chad here, it's the Year of the Family print, kind of shows the history of the Big Red One. So on behalf of the soldiers and family, we just want to present this small token of thanks for what you've done for the last couple of days, taking time out of your busy schedule, and of course what you do on the outside for all the other soldiers and families across the U.S. So thank you, Chad.
Awesome. That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Thanks, man. That's really a beautiful picture.
This concludes our event for the night.
Thank
I
you,
want to
guys.
thank the people here in person and also those watching online. I appreciate your time and attention, and wish you all a great evening. Thank you.
Okay. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.